56. Number 3. 56 is apart from the cases envisaged by the rubrics. A temporary interruption is allowed of Mass. 3. Between the consecration and the communion only for a very grave reason. For example, danger from an external cause, a grave need of the celebrant, we talked about that, and the necessity of baptizing or absolving a dying person. So that has to be a very grave reason to interrupt during the canon to communion. 57. If the interruption occurred after the consecration, be it of short or long duration, the celebrant is to resume the Mass where he left off. If the interruption was before the consecration and fairly short, for example, less than an hour, the celebrant may resume where he broke off. But if it was a long interruption, the celebrant should begin Mass again, and if he had left off after the offertory, it is better to take a fresh host and fresh wine and water and consume the ones which had been offered the first time after his communion, because it seems improper to offer them the second time. See, so, I mean, that's a very unusual case where you would interrupt for more than an hour. I can't even think of it unless, you had to rush to the hospital or something, or some sort of very unusual interruption. I've never seen it, never heard about it. So if it's more than an hour, you should start Mass again and take a new host and new wine. As if you have not said Mass, but then you consume the others. All right. A foreign body in the chalice. If an insect or any other foreign body, which happens, should be found in the wine before the consecration, if it is something that is not disgusting or does not leave any traces, and I don't know what he means by that, it will ordinarily be sufficient to take it out and continue the Mass. But if it were something that was unpleasant, that might cause nausea and vomiting, like a cockroach, or would leave any traces behind it, whatever that means, the chalice should be emptied, fresh wine and water taken and offered at least mentally, and the Mass continued. The wine and water which had been put aside should afterwards, if the celebrant does not wish to drink it at the ablutions, be thrown into the sacrarium, since it had been offered and blessed. Yes?
I think I know what he means by any traces left behind. Say maybe like a leaf falls in and it starts to dissolve in the...
Maybe so. I don't know what exactly he means by that. 59. If a foreign body should fall into the chalice or be found there after the consecration, which happens, little bugs, the celebrant is to consume it with the precious blood if it be something which is not dangerous or disgusting to take. Usually it's fruit flies. Those little tiny, they love that wine. They love the smell of the wine. And so that's the whole purpose of the pall, is to keep them out. The other ordinary flies don't usually, but you might be in a very hot place, or a place that is not. I mean, I imagine in Africa it must be terrible to keep the flies out. Very humid, equatorial kind of climate in a rural area, maybe that doesn't have screens. I mean, in this country, you probably wouldn't see something like that, but in other countries you might. So if it is disgusting, the priest should take it out carefully with as little as possible of the precious blood adhering to it, put it in a clean vessel, and pour wine over it to wash it. After Mass, the celebrant should burn the foreign body and throw the ashes and the wine he had used to cleanse the body into the sacrarium. So you got to set the cockroach on fire. Yes.
And then I would presume that the vessel that you contained it in would have to be purified.
Yes, definitely. Perhaps at the next Mass, you could put it someplace and do it at the next Mass. Yes.
You'd probably just drop it in the ablution cup, right? And deal with it afterwards. Be pretty discreet.
doesn't mention that. I think the idea is that the cockroach, let's say, would be soaked with the precious blood. I think that's the problem. See? And I think that's why it has to be burned.
Hmm.
I think he would mention that. But, you know, maybe other authors might mention it, so this is just one author. Number 60, if after the consecration anything poisonous or disgusting, which cannot be extracted, should fall into or be found in the chalice, the consecrated wine is to be put into another chalice. Fresh wine and water taken into the chalice of the Mass, offered, at least mentally, and consecrated, beginning at simile modo. Remember, you always do that if you're redoing the words of consecration. You start again at simile modo, and omitting all the ceremonies where it had been interrupted. After Mass, the wine which had been first consecrated is to be soaked up by pieces of cotton, wool, or linen. And these are to be kept in the chalice, locked up in an appropriate place until they have dried up, and the species of wine having ceased to exist, and with them the real presence. Then the wool is to be burned and the ashes thrown into the sacrarium. Why throwing ashes down the sacrarium would not clog up the sacrarium is beyond me. Yes.
Don't they easily dissolve ashes?
Perhaps, I don't know, but you might, and it's not, I don't think it would be proper to be putting a Drano down there. So anyway, but that's really rare. I mean, that's super rare. If anything poisonous should come into contact with the consecrated host, a fresh host should be taken, offered, and at least mentally consecrated, repeating just the actual words of consecration. Notice that, though. Without ceremonies, and the Mass continued. The host which had been first consecrated is to be kept in a corner apart in the tabernacle until the species corrupt, and then they are to be thrown into the sacrarium and may be washed down by water. Somebody was telling me that they saw that you could, yes, it's, I think in a footnote, someplace here, that you could add water to that in order to enhance or accelerate the corruption of the species. Because it's going to take 6 months for it to corrupt. I mean, if you just put a host in that has arsenic on it or something like that, it's going to take a long time to corrupt in this, air conditioning and heat and everything. It's just going to take forever. So you would put some water in to make it. You look troubled by that.
No, I was just thinking about the wine, the species of wine that you can't, it seems like he's saying that you can't add water to that to dissolve the species of the wine. Just basically dilute it until it's no longer wine.
He probably considers that a type of disrespect to it, I'd guess. Yeah.
If the case that was mentioned, if the wine, the precious blood becomes poisoned, wouldn't you need to clean
Well, the host, I think we're talking
well, the
about.
one before, about the precious blood,
All right.
wouldn't you need to somehow clean the chalice more? I mean, if it had poison in it, would it just kill you if you put water and wine in it again?
Did you say that again?
If somehow the chalice got poison in it, and you go through the process of putting it in the cotton, etc.,
Right.
wouldn't the chalice need to be cleaned in some more, advanced way because it has poison in it?
I think the idea is that you get all of the precious blood out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would assume that he doesn't mention it, but you could do an ordinary ablution and save that ablution and pour it down the sacrarium, it would seem to me. Because after it has been diluted that much, it's no longer the precious blood.
I was just thinking I would want to use a different chalice because if it had poison in it, it seems the vessel is dangerous.
Yeah, this is, This is outer space rare. You know, that some sort of enemy of yours is going to slip some arsenic or something into the masses, you know, and you're not looking. Maybe for Renaissance Italy, this could have been a... Oh, gosh, yeah, go ahead.
Or modern day France.
No, I don't think they're big on poisoning. Italy was big on poisoning in the Renaissance.
Or the Greeks, right?
No, they would gouge your eyes out.
Oh.
Yeah. That was do you have a question?
I did. I think I see what Hudson is saying, because it says to, you know, pour out the poisoned wine into a different chalice and then continue saying Mass with that same poisoned chalice. I wonder if it would be acceptable to just resume the Mass with the new chalice.
I don't see why not. A new chalice, yes. It depends on what he means by poison the two, you know. I don't, you know, he's not very... You'll never have this, all right? This is... As I said, you know, your enemy among the lay people, you know, want to knock you off. That's possible. Sometimes you get a little worked up. Now, if the host should be found broken at the offertory, and that could happen, another should be substituted for it if it can be done without causing any scandal or undue delay. If the defect be found after it has been offered, nothing is to be done unless the defect be serious or had been noticed and might cause scandal. Then another host should be taken, offered, at least mentally, and the Mass continued from where it had been interrupted. So it's possible that, you know, the host could split apart while it was on the paten. I've never had it, but it has. If the defect be discovered after the consecration, nothing is to be done. Should the host be accidentally broken in two, or the part marked off for the fraction had become detached before the moment of the fraction arrives, then when this comes, another part should be broken in order to carry out the ceremony of the breaking. So sometimes that happens is that, well, actually the fraction sort of goes wrong. In other words, the wrong part comes off. But that you'll see when you do rubrics. So we're not doing rubrics now. But it's good to, as I said, weaken the host in such a way that the fraction would go well. Fraction means where you break it. If when drinking the precious blood, the sacred particle, and this does happen, which is in the chalice should remain there, the celebrant may draw it to the edge of the chalice with his index finger so that he may consume it, or he may take the wine of the first ablution into the chalice and swallow the particle with this. That does happen. So you drink down the precious blood and there's the particle left at the bottom. It does happen. So those are the two things you can do. Accidents with the sacred species. If by accident, because the celebrant's hands were numb from cold, you can think of Canada, a part of the sacred host should slip into the precious blood. That could happen. The celebrant continues Mass and performs the actions with the remaining part of the host, if this can be conveniently done. If the entire host should fall into the chalice, it's possible. The celebrant is not to take it out, but is to continue the Mass, saying all the words as usual, but omitting the actions that would be done with the host and the signs of the cross that should be made over it. At the communion, he signs himself with the chalice, saying Corpus et Sanguis Domini Nostri Jesu Christi, and consumes the host and the precious blood together. Now, how you could consume a whole host with the precious blood, he does not say. Here's the entire host in the chalice. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, that again would be a very rare case where you drop the entire host into the, but maybe your hands are cold or you got the shakes or something like that. But I don't see how that's even possible, what he's telling you to do. The way to avoid all of this is to pay attention to what you're doing. Okay? 65. If the precious blood should be spilled, this could happen on a hard or non-absorbent surface, for example, on the paten, the foot of the chalice. It should, as far as possible, be absorbed by the priest's tongue. Footnote, if this cannot be done, it may be absorbed in cotton, wool, or linen. Afterwards, it must be kept in a becoming place and in, say, a chalice until the sacred species have evaporated and then burned and the ashes thrown into the sacrarium. Or else absorbed in wool or linen. The place should then be slightly scraped, that, for example, with a clean knife. I'm sorry, this is not B. And then the place should be carefully washed. Okay. The cloth used in the washing the surface should be washed in the 3 different waters, which are then thrown into the sacrarium. So treated as if a purificator that has been used. On a surface which is slightly absorbent, for example, on wood, or that cannot be completely washed, like a carpet, it should be licked up, if possible, or else absorbed in wool or linen. The place should then be slightly scraped, for example, with a clean knife, which is afterwards washed and water thrown into the sacrarium, and then washed, meaning the carpet. The scraping is burned, and the ashes and the water are thrown into the sacrarium, and any cloth used for the cleaning is to be treated as described above, in other words, as a used purificator. I don't know what the scraping is going to do for you. On a carpet, it might take some of the carpet up a little bit, some particles of the carpet. On a completely absorbent surface, for example, on the corporal, altar cloths, or vestments, this material is to be washed 3 times over the chalice. The water is poured through the material and collected in the chalice, and the water thrown into the sacrarium. Now this is interesting. Suppose it's your chasuble. You look at the footnote. It's poured through the material and collected in the chalice. Yes.
Well, actually, so why it need to be the chalice? Why just not a normal purification?
All I can do is tell you what it says. Yes.
Well, since the chasuble is not completely absorbent, right, I would imagine that you would treat it like the semi-absorbent material.
Probably so. You could get it on the alb, for example, if you're wearing a French style and it's open in the front, or even Roman style. You could, if you're careless with drinking the precious blood, get some on the alb or the amice. And this is not really a problem there. Yeah.
Have you ever had the misfortune of when you're consuming the precious blood, of it going down, so to speak, the wrong chute, or coughing, or nearly coughing, or... And
I'm trying to think. It was after 49 years. I don't recall that. I think I would. Again, you're so very careful of what you're doing, and even though the authors say the amount of wine should be of 1 draught, in other words, where you take it in 1 gulp, enough, in other words, not more than what you can take in 1 gulp. I always do it in a couple of gulps, precisely to avoid that. That's an author thing. But if you, it's also the wine. If the wine is a fortified wine, it's strong wine, like if you take a strong gulp of, brandy, you're probably going to cough.
Mhm.
You know, from that, you know, it's but now fortified wine is 18%. You know, it depends on people, but you know, it could cause a certain reaction. So you have to be careful of that. You might want to take a little bit first, see how it goes. But I've never. No, you're very, very conscious of what you're doing and all of that. You know, and very careful. It's only when you get careless that things like this could happen. See, on a completely, oh, I said that. 66. As much as possible of the precious blood should be taken up immediately after this accident, and the place where it had fallen marked by a clean cloth, or, for example, with inverted communion plate, the washing of the place or cloths is naturally left until after Mass. Now you have to watch it, and you're saying Mass in missions, and you're in a much more hostile atmosphere in that sense. It was hostile to repairing the problem. You don't want to spill the precious blood on the rug of the hotel. Okay? You don't. Yes.
Have you ever seen a chalice tip?
No.
No.
No. And again, you have to watch your chalices too. You want weight at the bottom. I even had this man put weights under the one chalice I used this morning. I had him put a weight under it, so that, you know, for any reason you hit it or something, it's not going to move. No, I've never seen that. But don't forget, you know, this could be elderly priests, and you know, I talk as if I'm not elderly. You know, this is really everybody. You know, and in every part of the world, you know, so it's. If some of the precious blood should fall on the beard of the celebrant, now the only persons that were permitted to have beards in the pre-Vatican II days were missionaries, and they had to be real missionaries, you know, in the missions, what are declared missions by the church, and Capuchins. Why the Capuchins were able to have beards, I don't know, but they were. The reason for the canon law is that precisely this, that there is a danger that the precious blood would get spilled into the beard or the mustache, which is very, very possible. See, so that's why it was canon law, 1917 canon law, no beards or mustaches for priests. And then they relaxed that in the Novus Ordo. Yes.
What about the Eastern rites, Your Excellency?
I don't know anything about Eastern rites. I have no idea. Yes.
Was it more common for the lay brothers to have beards then?
I never knew any lay brothers with beards. I had them in high school, and nobody had a beard.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wore beards in those days. This business of wearing beards is something new. Most people look horrible with them. It's true. Most people look horrible. Occasionally, but you know, to take care of one of those things, so that you look presentable with it, you would have to take more care than if you shaved in the morning. It takes about 5 minutes to shave in the morning. But you know, you're cutting your beard, and how do I look today? You know. But if they are neglected, you look. First of all, you look about 10 or 20 years older than you are, and then you know, you just look slovenly, and they're really bad. It's true. It's true. They just, I mean, you have to take care so much of it, like a very, very shortly, you know, a very short beard that is, you know, taken care of every single day. And some people it doesn't look bad, you know, but most of them look terrible. It makes you age at least 10 years. But anyway, it's forbidden. But I see these SSPX priests, you know, with beards and all. Makes me sick. You know, they don't resist that. You see. That's the part of the resistance. Don't get me started. So, he should absorb as much as possible of it with his tongue and later wash the place where it had fallen and throw the water into the sacrarium. While the rubric is silent about the spilling of the first ablution, which may contain some drops of the precious blood, it could, probably not, the same rules should be applied to it, which is 92. If a small portion only is spilled, for example, on the altar cloth or corporal, it will quickly evaporate and no washing will be necessary. Notice that. Because, you know, you're supposed to do this with the first ablution. You're supposed to run the chalice around like that so that you're getting all of the possible droplets on the edge of the chalice. And if you're not careful again, yes, some of it could come out. But he says if it falls on the corporal, don't worry about it. All right.
Your Excellency.
Yeah.
So you have in the cup of the chalice, you've tried to get every bit, but for whatever reason, there's just this one bit that you can't get. It's too close to the lip, that you could cause the blood, the precious blood to come out, or the ablution to. Would it be better just to discreetly lick the particle off?
No, what you would do is take the purificator very, very close up to it, and then tilt the chalice very, very carefully until it hits that little droplet, and then so that ensures that in case anything should happen. The worst that could happen is that the wine will engulf the precious blood and then it'll be on the purificator, which is fine. Licking it would not be bad either. It's just that it might be a little odd.
Yes.
If you're licking the chalice. If after an accident enough of the precious blood remains in the chalice to enable the celebrant to really to drink it at the consumption, he completes the Mass with that small quantity. If, however, none or not sufficient to make a drink remains, the celebrant must take fresh wine and water, offer it at least mentally, and consecrate it, beginning with simile modo. He may omit the prayer Deus qui humani substantiae, and all ceremonies, genuflections at the elevation, as explained in paragraph 16, etc. above. That's, again, very rare. No priest has ever told me any kind of stories like this. An accident with the sacred host, this could be more common. In general, if a sacred host should fall on a hard surface, this is afterwards to be washed and to be slightly scraped if the surface be of such a character that a light scraping will more thoroughly cleanse it, such as a rug. It depends on the what it fell on. And the water thrown into the sacrarium. If it falls on any absorbent material that can be washed, for example on the communion cloth, it is to be washed and the water thrown into the sacrarium. Now that's another thing. Well, you know how big a communion cloth is? How do you wash a communion cloth and throw the water into the sacrarium? You have to have a huge tub to wash that. And I have it seems that the communion cloth somehow went into desuetude after the introduction of the communion paten. That was not used before Pius XI. And in Matters Liturgical, it talks about the communion cloth, and somebody wrote in the margin, and how does the communion cloth protect the Blessed Sacrament? What does that, it is true, what does that do for the Blessed Sacrament? The only thing it would do if they're holding it is that if you drop the host, it would not go on the floor. That's true, it would do that. It would also, if you have a first communicant, usually a girl, who vomits as soon as she receives the Blessed Sacrament, it would help. You see, but those are real cases, but his question was, how does it protect the Blessed Sacrament? Everybody gets up and then puts the communion, everything falls on the floor then, the communion paten is much more effective in protecting the species than that. Yes.
Are they still supposed to do that? Take the cloth and...
Well, I read that they're not supposed to do that anymore. Now that you have, in another book, that you now that you have the communion paten, now it just sits there on the communion rail. What good does that do?
I remember when I would go to Mass and they had the communion cloth, I never knew what to do with it. I would just look at it.
Yeah, the old way was to take it under like this, and the old. What is older is that they would have no communion paten; they would just distribute that way. It happens often that you see a stray particle go when you're distributing communion. It just happens. You don't know where it is or where it went. And I saw one author says that you leave all things to providence at that point. In other words, if it's physically impossible to find that particle, which often it is, there's nothing you can do about it. But you'll see it, and it'll happen. That's why it's good to treat the hosts for particles before, to sift them and to get all the particles out. Don't just throw them into the ciborium. Okay, but that'll happen. It happens often, I would say. In other words, it's not rare. Let's see. Okay. If the celebrant in giving Holy Communion should drop a host, he at once picks it up, having noted as accurately as possible where the spot where it lay. Normally, you just stop everything. You get a purificator from the sacristy. You throw it down, and people know not to walk on that. So that's what you do. All right, and dropping hosts is again. It happens. It happens not infrequently. Dropping a host, I've done it many times. And if it had fallen on a place that was not dirty, he replaces it in the ciborium. But if it had fallen on a part of the floor which was dirty and had become soiled so that it could no longer be becomingly given to the Holy Communion or consumed by the celebrant himself before he takes the ablutions, he must return to the altar, put this host into the tabernacle, if feasible, in an empty ciborium, unveiled, so as to mark it off from other ciboriums. In a corner apart, this may be done after Mass. For the moment the host may be left on the corporal of the tabernacle, it is permissible to keep the host in water to hasten the process of corruption. Remember that. He will wash and, if necessary, scrape this spot and then throw the water and scrapings into the sacrarium. Most of the time you have a wet purificator and there's really nothing left to throw into the sacrarium. But if the host has fallen outside the rails so that the spot where it lay is likely to be trodden on, and most of the, well, not always, sometimes it falls outside of the rails, even though marked by a cloth, before the end of Mass, the celebrant had better return to the altar, leave the ciborium on the corporal, go with water and a cloth to the spot where the host had lain and purified at once. So if there's any danger that people would walk on it, most people know not to walk on it. But if there's any danger, that's what you should do. Just go back to the altar and do that before continuing the distribution of Holy Communion. Capello, who is a very well-known canonist, writes, "The law of washing the place where a host had fallen does not bind gravely, except perchance the sacred host had fallen on a place which is trodden on. Even then, Vermeersch, also well-known, the canon law, holds that there is no grave obligation if it is morally certain that no particle of the sacred host is remaining there," which may be true, especially with those little hosts that we get from, that we use here. They are pretty much particle-free. So if it is morally certain, that means that you could act on it, then you don't have to do anything. According to Vermeersch, who is hence it binds only sub levi, any reasonable cause excuses from it, so whenever the washing would cause much wonder, it may be lawfully omitted. But no one would wonder at it, so you should do it. So other theologians, St. Alphonsus, Vermeersch III, Eugenico, and etc. Okay. You should do it, and just be sure. If a particle touches the dress of a communicant, so this is with women, the theologians say that he is not bound because of the difficulty, popular wonder, etc., to have the place ritually washed. Imagine. But if it should touch his hand, they think he or she should wash that afterwards in the sacristy, and water is put into the sacrarium. See, so it's not necessary to take someone's jacket and wash it. It's just not considered necessary. But if it falls in somebody's hand, then you should do that. If a host should fall when the priest is giving Holy Communion at the grill, that means in a Carmelite nun's monastery, for example, within the enclosure of cloistered nuns, it may be picked up by one of the nuns, with the aid of a paten or even with her fingers, and consumed or returned to the priest. Or in such a case, the priest may enter the enclosure, as he is allowed to minister to the sick, because of the reverence due to the Blessed Eucharist. See, it's strictly against canon law for any male to enter into what is known as a cloister, cloistered nuns, Carmelite nuns. Only the bishop of the diocese may do so. See, so that's why it's so strict. You see, and so that's why it'd be. But the Blessed Sacrament obviously is more important. So there you have essentially epikeia. If a host should be found on the altar or on the floor, and it is not known whether it is consecrated or not, the priest takes it reverently, but without a stole or lights, and puts it in a clean vessel. For example, an empty ciborium in a becoming place. It is to be consumed as soon as feasible by a priest who is celebrating Mass after his communion and before the ablutions. It is not to be given in Holy Communion to anyone, since its consecration is doubtful. You do not adore doubtful hosts. Finally, number 7. Also, if something falls down, say a woman's breast, sometimes they're a little low here and all, and it falls inside, just let her take it out. You don't want a scene like that, okay? But then she should wash her hands afterward. Yes. Should the celebrant vomit the sacred species? Now that could happen, say, an hour after consuming them, or communicant within, say, half an hour of receiving the small host. So half an hour for the regular communicant, an hour for the celebrant. After consuming them, if the species are perceptible, they are to be separated as far as possible from other matter, and again swallowed, unless this would cause nausea and provoke further vomiting, which is very likely. Now this can happen. It's that's why if you're in doubt, stomach-wise, don't say Mass, all right? If you're, some people are vomiters and some people are not. Some people vomit for nothing, you know, it's just part of life is vomiting. I know of a very prominent family that are, you know, Olympic vomiters. Other people have very strong stomachs, and even if their stomach is upset, they don't vomit. So I don't know, you'll have to classify yourself in the sort of the vomiter range, you know, and you know how you vomit. Okay, so but don't take any chances. You don't want this to happen. That's a terrible thing. All right. If it would, they are to be put aside in a clean vessel, imagine, in a becoming place until they corrupt and then burned. It may, for example, be soaked up in pieces of cotton wool, which are to be burned, so cotton balls and whatnot, and the ashes thrown into the sacrarium. If the species are not discernible in the vomit, and so may be regarded as already corrupt, the vomit may be burned. How you burn vomit, I don't know. But he says so. Probably soaking it up and discarding it later, yeah.
Your Excellency, with regards to placing a host in water to help speed up the corruption,
Yes.
now obviously the host is wet. It has the appearance of being wet bread, but when do you consider it?
Oh, you would know that it's corrupt. When it's no longer identifiable as bread. In other words, you wouldn't eat it. It's like mold and other.
Right.
Yeah. But this business of vomiting, what is more common is that people vomit. That is more common, so you have to apply the same rules there. Yes?
So I think what it said in that case where you have the little girl first communicant who expels the host, ideally, if she's up to it, she should consume the host that she expels.
Yes, if she's up to it. Usually they are so wrought and overwrought with, you know, all sorts of problems that I think you'd have to, probably the best would be to soak it up somehow and then burn it later and throw it. Yeah.
About the vomit of the priest, that you should put aside in a clean vessel in a becoming place. What is that? What is a becoming place?
For example, that box in the sacristy that looks like a tabernacle, that's a becoming place. Any place where it won't be disturbed and you know, yes.
That wouldn't, I guess, smell disgusting.
Maybe.
I see.
So maybe you want a discreet becoming place. According to your abilities and circumstances. Yes. Again, but first communions are frequently, and also torch bearers. They're vomiters too. You know, they get. You can see that look on their face. They turn green or purple or something, and you know it's coming. Here it comes. So you don't give them communion if they're looking like that. All right, just skip them. But female first communicants are big offenders on that. They get all worked up for something and then they vomit.